What are the 5 top species that come to your mind right now for fly fishing? Are brown trout, steelhead, smallmouth bass, muskie, or largemouth on that list right now? And have you ever wondered about fishing some of the great waters of Canada? Today's guest is a guide in Southern Ontario and is the new fly fisher host. And today he's going to give us a roadmap to success on some of the great rivers of the Great Lakes. This is the Wet Fly Swing podcast, where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. How's it going? I'm Dave, host of the Wet Fly Swing podcast. I've been fly fishing since I was a little kid. I grew up around a little fly shop and have created one of the largest fly fishing podcasts in this country. I've also interviewed more of the greatest fly anglers and fly fishing guides than just about anyone out there. Rob Heel, Southern Ontario guide and new fly fisher host, is going to share his experience fishing the Grand River, the Saugeen, a bunch of great rivers that include not only steelhead but great trout fishing. You're going to hear about these unique rivers and this holdover steelhead species that doesn't out-migrate until a year later, so you got a chance to catch these larger fish. We're going to find out about these big brown trout in the area as well and how to target them and some of his other go-to rivers that he fishes. Plus, you're going to hear about John Gierach's 5 stages of evolution as a camper. This is a good one. Rob brings us up today, and we'll find out which stage you are in on this episode. Here he is, across the pond from Michigan and New York, yet 10x less pressure. Rob Heel at Rob Heel Fly Fishing Services on Facebook. How you doing, Rob?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
Great. We're going to talk today about Ontario. I haven't been up there yet, but we've done a number of episodes up there, and I think we're actually heading that way this next year. And also the new fly fisher. You know, I think you've been working with them. There was tragically, I think Colin, passed away here this year, and I'm kind of doing a little bit of a celebration because I think he did a lot of great things out there. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today as well. But yeah, maybe we can just start with what you have going. Is this time of year, we're kind of in the holiday season, December, January. Are you still fishing, or is this your break time?
Well, we could still be fishing. In Southern Ontario, there's 2 sort of extended seasons. Some of the rivers have open seasons up to the 31st of December, and others, there are some that are open all year long, but we're generally prohibited by the weather here, which is the case right now. We just got dumped on with snow and cold temperatures last night, but I expect to get out a couple or 3 times between now and the new year. Likely not guiding at this point, but just fun fishing.
Yeah, just getting out and going for it. Gotcha. And then when is it kind of springtime? When do you start coming back to where your guides or you're guiding?
Well, again, weather contingent. If I can get out, I've got enough sort of, I like to call them on the hook clients where their schedules are open. If we start getting decent temperatures in February and March, we'll be on the rivers. But again, it's just weather contingent. Typically by April, we're good to go. And then the inland, what we refer to as the inland trout season, it starts on the 4th Saturday of April and goes to September 30th. So that opens up all the rivers for both trout and steelhead and all of their upstream ranges as well.
Gotcha. Okay. And what is, when we say Southern Ontario, what is what delineates that?
Well, if you look at the map, it would typically be the area from Tobermory on the Bruce Peninsula, which separates Lake Huron proper and Georgian Bay, down to really Niagara and the border. So it's a fairly vast area. It's that sort of wedge right between Lake Huron, Lake Ontario, and Lake Erie. Yeah,
Lake Erie. So if you get up into Lake Superior, kind of north of that, you're out of Southern Ontario.
Yeah. We're typically referring to that as Northern Ontario or the near north.
Right. Even though Ontario is still, if you look at the province, I mean, it's huge. You're still, even that northern part is still south, right, for the province.
Yeah. It's a massive province.
Yeah. I mean, massive. It's interesting to look because when you think of the states, we've got some big states around. Montana's one of them. But I mean, just looking at the map of Ontario is probably 3 times as big as Montana.
Yeah, it literally takes a day to drive across from the Quebec border to the Manitoba border. It takes 24 hours.
Yeah. That's awesome. So we're going to talk, like we said, some of the areas you're guiding down there and, and that's part of it today and also the new fly fisher. But Where do you start when somebody's calling you up for Ontario? Are there a few species or areas that are always kind of top on the list for people?
For me in my business, trout and the Great Lakes steelhead are the two glamour species. I live on a tailwater of the Grand River. So the Grand River is one of the largest watersheds in Ontario, in southern Ontario. And the first 22 kilometers below the Bellwood Lake Reservoir is a tailwater. And it's well known for its brown trout fishing, tremendous hatches. We've got, probably a dozen different species of mayflies that come off through the season, caddis all year. And it's trophy fishing. I mean, it's one of the few rivers that I've, at least in my area, I mean, I fished in places where you'll get rising fish throughout the day. I just got back from Idaho a few weeks ago, and we had rising fish on one spring creek all day long. It was unbelievable. But where we are and when you're dealing with more pressured water, you don't typically get apex browns coming up in the middle of the day and eating a caddis, but we're fairly well known for that here on the Grand River tailwater. And then the Grand goes from Bellwood Lake about another 150 miles to Lake Erie, and through the middle section, what the province of Ontario actually deemed it part of our exceptional waters in our Exceptional Waters Act, and it's single barbless regulations throughout. Catch and release for all species. There is a good a smallmouth bass population, but we also get a run of Lake Erie rainbow trout or steelhead. I know a lot of guys don't like that
right.
Great Lake steelhead thing, but
yeah,
that's
we've talked about that a number of times. In fact, we had a Ontario biologist on our In the Bucket podcast, and he said he was like, "Hey, up in the Great Lakes, they call Chinook, and all the other salmon. So why isn't it a steelhead?" And it's a good point. It's like if you're calling them the other one Chinook, I think it's a steelhead. So
I've used that argument as well. And if you talk to enough guys,
does it hold up?
Yeah, it depends on who you're talking to, but
yeah.
And a lot of the West Coast, the Pacific West Coast guys that haven't fished, or vice versa, Great Lake. I've never fished steelhead on the Pacific West Coast. Certainly a bucket list thing. I have fished in BC, but I've never got to the coast. But at any rate.
Oh, where have you fished BC?
Southeastern BC, like Fernie in that area.
Yeah. So you didn't chase steelhead there? No.
But if you talk to guys, I know guys like Rick Kustich, he's fished both. I remember back in the 90s, Lanny Waller put out his steelhead, those 3 steelhead videos, and they sort of dovetailed into each other. And then there was a re-release in the 2000s where he added another segment on the Great Lakes steelhead. And all the guys that he talked to, I don't know where it's available anymore. I know I had it on CD for a while, but
we'll look it up. Yeah.
Yeah. So he talked to guys like Rick Kustich and a couple or 3 other guys that had fished both, and they said unequivocally, these fish are the same fish. I mean, we know their origins. We know they're McLeod River steelhead, and the only difference is that they don't touch salt water, and that's always been the argument. But they go through all the processes, the legitimate smoltification where they leave the river en masse.
Yeah, they're wild, right? I mean, these fish in the Grand are fish that are spawning in the wild and coming back in the wild, right?
Yeah, the Grand is, and like a lot of the Ontario rivers, the Grand is 100% self-sustaining. There's absolutely no stocking on the Grand.
Yeah.
And then if you get into some of the smaller tributaries along Georgian Bay and Lake Huron, a lot of those are 100% self-sustaining as well. The Canadian side has gone in a little different direction over the past, say, 50 years than the Americans, where the emphasis is on stocking big numbers and getting big returns, whereas the Canadian side has typically relied on river management, rehabilitation, so on and so forth, and relied on self-sustaining.
It's amazing about that because that's the timeless, debate, wild versus hatchery fish. If you come out the West Coast, people are still having the debate, wild versus hatchery. They've been out here forever. Hatchery fish were first stocked in, 130 years ago. And I think the take home is that hatchery fish are not going to solve the problem. I think that's what people have realized. Like, hey, you can plant 1 billion hatchery fish, but they're not really fixing it, because if they would have fixed the problem, we'd already be good. But steelhead, as you see it on the West Coast, are not doing good right now.
Right.
Even though we still stock lots of fish. So I think you guys are onto something, because obviously the Grand River is, I can tell you from my experience, just hearing on the podcast, it's one of those destination spots, that people want to go to, and probably, that's part of it.
Yeah, and the Grand is a considerably different than most of the rivers in South Central Ontario. It gets an early run of fish. Like, we typically have fishable numbers in the Grand by the end of August, and if the water temperatures are conducive, if they're hovering around that 65 or lower, which can happen. I mean, it's not happening as frequently as it once did, but the fish begin coming in really on the first big water event around the end of August and early September. And my thinking, I don't have any real, science to back this up, but my thinking is, if you consider Lake Erie as the shallowest of the Great Lakes, if the Lake Erie Basin around Dunnville, where the fish would be staging, is, say, 74 degrees, then the steelhead don't mind coming into 70 degrees that the river is, because it's a cooler environment. And I think that those Lake Erie fish are unique in that way, at least the Grand River fish and a couple of the smaller tributaries to the west of the Grand River, whereas most Great Lake returns, there's sort of a 60-40 or 70-30 split, where 30 to 40% of the fish will come up in the fall, and then the remaining will start coming in January, February, March. The Grand River fish, the majority of the fish come in the fall and are done. Like, we see in the tributaries, I know Larry Halleck, I don't know if you know that name, but
I've heard that name. Yeah.
Okay, so he's a retired DFO biologist, and a pretty smart guy. But he's known for some of his photography in the tributaries, and these fish are coming into the tributaries by the end of the trout season, which is September 30th. And I remember, almost 30 years ago, when I first moved from the East Coast to Southern Ontario, I saw steelhead in these tributaries in like the middle of August, and good numbers of fish. So it is a unique river in that sense, with the majority of the fish coming in the fall, and they're fantastic fish. I mean, as we already talked about, they're wild, and they're just supercharged, and they probably, on average, I can't remember the last time I caught a 4-pound steelhead in the upper Grand. They'll come up to Caledonia Dam, and then the larger fish kind of separate. They're able to make the jump over the Caledonia Dam, where the smaller fish don't necessarily. I think if you talk to most guys, I don't know if you've ever done anything with Tyler Dunsmore. He does a lot of guiding.
I wanted to give a shout out. We had we have another host on our show. It's the Great Lakes Dude podcast, Jeff Liskay, and he hosts our episodes. And he had Tyler Dunsmore was on in number 6.
Okay.
So actually, I'll put a link to the show notes, October of 23. So we did an episode that Jeff did with Tyler, and he actually talked about Larry in that episode.
Right. But I think if you talk to any of these guys that frequent the Middle Grand and that chase steelhead on it, we don't catch small fish.
Right.
They're typically 6 pounds plus, and fish in the first fish I caught this season was pushing. I didn't tape it, and I never photograph, very seldom ever photograph fish when I'm fishing alone, but I measured it on my rod, and it was between 34 and 35 inches. It's the second biggest steelhead I've ever seen come out of the Big
fish, like a teen, like upper teens or something, 16, 17 pounds.
Mid-teens for sure.
Yeah.
14, it was 14 or 15 pounds, I'm guessing.
That's a nice steelhead.
Yeah.
So that's the steelhead in the Grand. And then you mentioned brown trout. So that's something I haven't heard as much about. So that's a big fishery on the Grand?
Yeah, the upper Grand through the towns of Ferguson and Laura. I would say almost a world-renowned fishery. We've had our challenges with it over the past 10 years. Certainly something that the Friends of the Grand, which is the local advocacy group, I sat on the board of directors with them for I think 11 years, and we're missing some age classes on on a regular basis. It is for the most part, a stocked fishery, but it's managed like a self-sustaining fishery in that we stock it with 24,000 browns a year. The cold water influence from Bellwood Lake, it's not a huge tailwater by any means. It's not like those big reservoirs in Colorado. It doesn't stay sub 70 degrees all summer. But we stock it with 24,000 fish a year, and there's 7 different management zones on the river. So there's 4 that are catch and release only for browns and single barbless hooks, and then there's 3 that are open to general regulation. So it's managed like a self-sustaining fishery, but it does rely heavily on stocking. And the reason is it has nothing to do with the quality of the fish, the quality of the water. It's the geology. It's predominantly limestone bedrock.
Not enough food.
No, there's lots of food. There's not enough gravel.
Oh, okay.
It's just not suitable. The fish go through the motions. I mean, we've certainly done red counts and red observations over the years, but also being a tailwater with the dramatic fluctuations that can happen in the fall, which is when the brown trout are spawning, many of the eggs we believe just get pushed out when it goes from, I'll talk in cubic meters per second because that's my language up here.
Yeah.
But like normal summer flows are on the tailwater are typically between 5 and 7 CMS.
Yeah.
And if that jumps up due to a big rain event in October, November, if we get 75 CMS all of a sudden almost overnight, then it's just pushing those eggs out of what little gravel there is,
right.
And we're just not getting a lot of natural reproduction. But it's still I mean, there's a handful of guys on it that hunt big fish, and I can tell you myself, from the first week of May to the second week of June, the fishing can be fantastic, and we're getting fish upwards of 6-7 pounds.
Let On DeMark Lodge give you the Montana fly fishing experience you deserve. The gin clear waters of the Missouri River offer a world-class experience with one of the finest rainbow trout and brown trout fisheries in the world. Whether you're a seasoned angler or new to the sport, their family of guides will tailor a trip just for you. You can head over to ondemarklodge.com to fish one of the great trout streams in the country. Pescador on the Fly offers a full range of fly fishing gear for any angler and any budget, with premium rods delivered directly to you. This saves you money by eliminating the middleman markup. The El Rey G6 is the most packable high-performance fly rod on the market, performing like a 4-section rod but with unmatched portability. Never fly without your G6. Discover the El Rey series and more at pescadoronthefly.com. So there are some fish that are holding over in there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, these are fish that, so they stock. So even though there's not a lot of natural reproduction, some of those 24,000 are just living. I mean, they're just, they're hanging out and they're older fish.
Yep, that's right.
Wow. So you have the browns, and then in the Grand, I didn't realize how diverse. Obviously, you've got all these different sections. So those are a couple of species. What are some other top, if you had to say 2 or 3 other ones that people are fishing for out there?
The fly guys, smallmouth bass for sure, and there's an abundance of rivers and lakes. The Maitland River runs into Lake Huron. That's a terrific bass fishery. The Saugeen River, which is where I do the majority of my guiding for steelhead and bass, it's a great fishery. The Grand also, and there's dozens and dozens of lakes around that have, if you've got access to a watercraft, fantastic smallmouth fishing, and a lot more guys are getting into muskie now too, and not just in the open water. The Saugeen River has a fairly healthy population of muskie. We're not getting 50-inch fish on a regular basis, but I know over the past 20 years that I've been exposed to them, there's been probably a half a dozen fish that I've heard of that have hit that high 40s and even got into the low 50s.
Yep.
And then largemouth to some degree. There's a lot of great largemouth lakes. We get a few in the rivers, but not many. But it's they're definitely bass are popular on a fly.
Yeah.
I mean they
are.
If you ask me, they're not my favorite. They're not my favorite fish to fish for. But if you ask me what a perfect game fish is, I'd have to go with smallmouth bass.
Right.
I mean, they do everything that we want in a fish. They're aggressive. They jump. You can fish them in shorts and
Yep.
t-shirts.
Right.
Yeah, they're just a terrific sport fish.
Yeah, yeah, they are. Yeah, no, we're actually doing our smallmouth bass school right not too far from you. We're down in Michigan. We're heading out with Schultz Outfitters,
Okay.
and yeah, we're going to be doing that in I think it's mid-July this next year. So we got a crew of people coming down, and yeah, I mean, I'm pretty excited because I mean, obviously smallmouth bass are everywhere, but you don't find them as large as you do, in some of these areas like you do with Schultz down in outside of I guess Detroit. The Huron
Right.
and all that. Well, yeah, there you go. So there's it's the Huron River down there, which is flowing into the same lake you're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's get going back to the Grand. Which lake does it flow into and flow out of, or where's it coming from?
So its origins, like the majority of rivers in southern Ontario, start in what we refer to as the Dundalk floodplain, and that's a high elevation area of glacial moraine. So it's all sandy glacial deposit. There's not a lake per se or a reservoir per se that's big enough to support any of the rivers. It's just a massive catchment zone, and the majority of rivers flow either north to Georgian Bay, west into Huron, or in the Grand's case, it goes all the way to Erie, to Lake Erie at Dundalk.
Goes to Erie.
Yeah.
So is Dundalk? There's actually a town of Dundalk. Is that the same Dundalk area?
There is a town of Dundalk, and yes, that's kind of the area where if you look, you'll see, if you're on a map, you'll see like the reaches of the Upper Saugeen, all the little tributaries into Georgian Bay, and then if you follow the Grand proper, the main stem of the Grand, that's really where it oriented. It starts as a bunch of little trickles that feed into a massive watershed.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, so you're right. I mean, yeah, that's the cool thing. You're right smack in the middle of it. You got all three, four lakes, kind of, right? Like Ontario, Erie, Huron, and then Georgian Bay.
Yeah.
Which one are you fishing, throughout the year most often? And are you fishing mostly rivers, or are you out in the lakes?
I'm mainly fishing rivers. I've got a couple of little bass lakes that I will put my boat on in the summer, but I have an adipose flow, so it's not a great lake boat, if you will. But so yeah, I'm mainly fishing the rivers, and the rivers that I really comfortable guiding on are the Saugeen, sort of in order: the Saugeen, the Maitland, and then going into Georgian Bay, the Beaver River, the Big Head. These are all smaller tributaries, but still get good runs of steelhead. The Big Head it's a small. I would consider it a smallish river in terms of steelhead rivers. Mainly what I would consider a nymphing river, where we're using indicators, or tight line nymphing in some cases. It's not really large enough to swing flies in, and the majority of the larger pools are typically occupied by center pinners. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's just the way it is. But I like fishing it a couple or three times a year just to sort of get that indicator thing out of my system. I swing flies 90% of the time for steelhead now, so it's nice when you hit those little rivers on during good conditions, and they're going to fill up with fish. It's nice to just go put a bend in the rod and get a couple in the net without the monotony of, if you will, of swinging flies. You know what it's like.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So the Saugeen is one that you're fishing for, and that is that multiple species, or what is the focus there?
Yeah, mainly steelhead, and then in the summer smallmouth bass and muskie too. There is muskie and pike on it.
Okay.
But I target the smallmouth. When I was guiding full time, I'm not guiding full time anymore because of my involvement with the show, and I'm typically away during the best, June and July, during the best smallmouth fishing. So I don't fish it as frequently. And then in the fall, the 6 weeks from the 1st of October to the middle of November, then I'm sort of back in the river full time.
Gotcha. You mentioned the show, The New Fly Fisher. Maybe talk about that a little bit. Let's take it back to how you got into The New Fly Fisher and Colin and all of that. Was that something that just happened, or describe that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I think there was an evolution. We did back when I first started guiding in the late '90s. I think the first show I did with them, I helped them out with, was in 2007, and that was Colin and I on the Saugeen River bass fishing. It's a great show to watch. It's an older one, and I look a lot thinner and and in better shape at that time. But I think Colin, from what Mark and Bill Spicer both told me, I think I've kind of been on Colin's radar. I did about a half a dozen shows with them before I joined them.
Yeah.
And I think I was kind of on Colin's radar, but I think from what Mark told me, he felt that I was too young at the time, and going back to when I was in my mid-30s kind of thing. And I guess it was 2018. I've known Mark and Colin now for, the better part of 20 years, and have attended shows where we've been, not necessarily in the same booth, but the same hotel. And we all just got to know each other. And in 2018, I was salmon fishing with my dad in Newfoundland, and Mark phoned me and left a message. We were on the river, and I just saw that he called. I didn't think anything of it. I thought he was probably calling me to ask a question. And then, he asked me if I'd be interested in joining the show, and gave me the rundown, told me to talk it over with my family, and it wasn't a tough decision.
Yeah, right.
My wife was hugely supportive of it, and has been. My daughter's she's starting university next year, so we're going to be empty nesters, and it came at a good time because Ella, my daughter, was old enough to, she was a little more independent, and the travel time, I'm away for 2 to 3 weeks at a time. So I knew that was going to be a challenge, but Becky, my wife, has been hugely supportive of it, and it's a great gig.
Yeah, it is. And where have you, on the New Fly Fisher, have you traveled kind of all around, or do you stick specifically to areas that, up in Ontario, or what's that look like?
Yeah, I haven't spent a lot of time in Ontario until this year. I shot 2 shows, one on the North Shore of Lake Superior for coastal brook trout, and another one in a pike show in a place called Brace. Like I have done a handful of shows in Ontario, but for the past 5 years, I've spent most of my time on the east coast of Canada and the U.S. So Maine and Pennsylvania, and then New Brunswick and Newfoundland. And I didn't spend any time out west until this year. I was in Idaho for a week and shot a show in Ketchum.
Oh, in Ketchum.
Yeah.
Nice.
And but for the most part, it's been salmon and trout in Newfoundland. And then I've done some striper shows, which is another one of those fish that I've absolutely fallen in love with them. I can't get enough striped bass fishing. I've done 3 shows with them now. One on the St. John River in New Brunswick, which is a massive river, and then I did one on the Miramichi River with. That was a fun one. I did that one with my father. So I'm originally from Nova Scotia.
Oh, okay.
And grew up fishing New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, and then so anyway, I called Mark one afternoon when I was getting sort of prepared for the show, and I said, "Hey, my dad's at the time he was early 80s, and I said, listen, I had an idea. If my dad paid his way at the lodge, what would you think of doing a father and son show?" So he jumped on it. He loves that. And so anyway, my dad drove up from Nova Scotia, and we spent 3 days striper fishing on the Miramichi. Wow. It was unbelievable. I mean, if you landed a fish, you couldn't drop your fly back in the water. It was like a friggin' piranha pool.
No kidding.
It was unreal. I figured the 2 of us landed 300 fish in 3 days.
And was this like, were you hitting them on some type of a migration cycle, or what was going on?
We were just pre-spawn. The last day that we were there, we did start seeing spawning activity, but we just hit it. We just hit it at the right time. It's funny, a lot of guys that have fished the Miramichi will say, yeah, it's a slam dunk. You can't miss. But my dad went back. He's actually gone back 3 years in a row now.
Wow.
The next year, so we were there on our long weekend in May, which is Victoria Day, and it's typically around the 24th of May. They went back for the same week, him and his fishing buddy from Halifax, and they got 1 fish. And all the guides were scratching their heads. They were marking fish. They knew the fish were there. There was a big swing in water temperature. It went from I can't remember, 55 degrees down to 47 degrees overnight. And nobody was catching fish. Now, the week before that, one of my good friends and fishing buddies here in Ontario, Keith Blair, he was there with his buddy, and they knocked him dead literally the day before my dad got there. It was like they shut down. So they're just like any other fish. It's not a slam dunk. You have to go with managed expectations, but if you hit it right, it's It's unreal.
That's right. When was that when you guys hit it right? What time of year was it?
It was the third week in May.
Yeah, third week of May.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. And did it feel like, I always kind of half jokingly about this, kind of like fishing sometimes in these places where you're catching them every cast. Do you get tired of catching the stripers when you've caught so many, or do you just keep like loving it?
Honestly, Dave, if I was there just fishing, I probably would have left after day 2. But because we're shooting the show,
Oh, right.
once
you got the show.
once we had all the fish, that we needed for the
Right.
show in the first hour.
Yeah.
So then we were upgrading, and we did get a couple of fish. I landed the largest fish. It was 35 inches. But then we just started fooling around with different presentations, and we were getting them on the surface. We had one, between the guide, myself, and my dad, we had one big Garthside gurgler. And by the time we were done with that fly, it was like it had one piece of foam left on it and a little bit of thread. But they wouldn't eat a conventional popper. I had all kinds of large, like largemouth poppers. It was strange. They wouldn't touch that, but they would fight over this 7-inch Garthside gurgler. So anyway, that's what we did. We got top water eats and lots of really cool drone footage. But I think if I was there on my own, I would have just said, after day 2, I got nothing left to prove, or I might have hired a guy to take me salmon fishing. That week is typically the first week that they start seeing fresh fish come in.
Oh, that's right.
Most of the kelts are
you're getting
spent salmon are gone, and you're getting fresh fish. So
right. That's cool. Yeah, because the Atlantic salmon, and that's another one that was on our list. Hopefully this next year as well. In fact, that's the cool thing about this. As we talk about this, you realize, and you just mentioned Atlantic salmon, which I guess is that the thing down back to Ontario? You guys don't really have Atlantic salmon out there?
There is a restoration program because Atlantic salmon are indigenous to Lake Ontario.
Oh, they are?
They are, yeah. Historically, at the turn of the century with industrialization, they were
wiped out.
Pretty much wiped out.
Yeah.
But there is, as you probably know, there's a program on the St. Mary's River between Lake Superior and Lake Huron that's quite successful. There is a good. I fished them in the early 2000s. I was up there like 5 years in a row, and it's dynamite fishing. We do get the odd one in. Occasionally you'll hear a guy takes probably a stray from some of the other rivers in Lake Huron, and then Lake Ontario does have a restoration program where a number of the rivers are being restocked, and we're starting to see some returns. It's not. I wouldn't call it a viable. I would never say I'm going down to the Credit River to fish for Atlantic salmon, but guys do get them as a bycatch fairly regularly.
Right. And are those fish? Those are migrating out to the ocean and back?
No, they just go to Lake Ontario. Okay,
yeah, because wasn't there a connection from the Great Lakes out to the ocean, or is that not?
There is. The St. Lawrence is the connection, but those fish were a landlocked fish. The historical Atlantic salmon of Lake Ontario were a landlocked fish. They never went to the ocean.
Okay.
So they just spent their adult lives in the big lake foraging, and then they would return to, I would assume at that time, most of the tributaries would have had a run.
Gotcha. Wow.
But it's that old, if you research it, it's that old tale about the early Europeans filling barrels with pitchforks.
Yeah. Right.
It was that they were that prolific.
I know. Yeah, that's it. So, and I always get confused on this, but you have Lake Ontario, and is the water? Yeah, it's flowing out to the ocean or out to to Quebec City, towards Quebec City, right?
Yes. So the St. Lawrence starts at the eastern range of Lake Ontario, and then that flows to the Atlantic.
It's cool because you start to put things in perspective. When you're out there and the Great Lakes are so huge, it's hard to comprehend, right, how big they are. But then as you look out at where we're talking about, New Brunswick and Quebec, I mean, it's even bigger. It's just this vast country land, right? I mean, what does that feel like where you're living? Have you explored some of those areas? Because how far do you go up north, right? People are probably taking random float planes out into these areas, Hudson Bay. I mean, it just seems like so remote that like nobody's out there. Is that pretty much how it looks?
There certainly are some programs, lodges, facilities that you can go to, like in Hudson Bay and James Bay, the Albany system and the Sutton River are probably the most well known. I fished the Albany a couple of years ago for brook trout, and it was amazing. The Sutton River is well known for its large brook trout, but as you get, I guess once you sort of get north of the area that we refer to, well, it's referred to as Algoma country. Once you get north of that, it's starting to get pretty remote. Most of a lot of it's fly-in only. There's just no
No facilities or lodges or anything.
Infrastructure there to just drive to these places.
Yeah.
So most of that stuff is fly-in.
Is fly out. Yeah. It's interesting because we just did an episode. We've done quite a bit over in Alaska, right on the other side of the North America. And some of those places in Southeast Alaska, or even, it's pretty remote out there too. I mean, like we've had some guests say that, hey, I'm out here in the guide trip. There's nobody, even if you had an e-perb to beep somebody, nobody's going to come get you if you're in trouble. You know, it's like, pretty much you're going to die. I would guess that Canada's the same way, right? I mean, you're up there, you're out in the remote countries up on the Sutton. If something happens up there, and you're on your own, there's not a heck of a lot you can do, right?
Not if it was time sensitive. They could, there would certainly be enough between like Moosonee, Fort Albany. There's probably Coast Guard or Ministry of Natural Resources search and rescue people, but they're not going to get there in hours. It's going to take them a while to get there and find you on those places. So yeah, you got to have your wits about you when you do those things.
Step into the world where the river whispers and the fishing is nothing short of legendary. This year, I ventured into the heart of eastern Idaho's Yellowstone Teton territory, where the fish were larger than life and the waters held the secrets of the best fly fishing out west. Yellowstone Teton territory is not just a location, it's a gateway to adventures that will etch themselves into your memory. With crystal clear rivers like the Henry's Fork and the South Fork of the Snake, and enough lakes to keep you going all year long, make your way to Yellowstone Teton territory and embark on a journey to one of North America's finest fly fishing destinations. Whether you're planning your trip now or just dreaming it up, the YTT is where those dreams turn into reality. Remember, Yellowstone Teton territory. That's Teton, Teton. It's time to experience Eastern Idaho for yourself and support this podcast at the same time. The Polar Bear Provincial Park, right? That's kind of up towards the Sutton. I guess it's pretty cool. Yeah, I haven't been out, obviously, but that would be fun to explore some of that country up there.
Yeah.
Well, let's take it back into like your home, like where you're guiding again. So we talked about the species and some of the areas. Mm-hmm. What are, if somebody was calling you now and they're like, hey, we want to come up there, we're going to be in there. What's a good time? What do you tell people as far as, if we keep it on the brown trout or steelhead or maybe the peak time when you're guiding?
So for the brown trout on the Grand, anytime from the opener, we don't get massive hatches for the first 10 days. The first big important hatch is the Hendricksons, and we have a terrific Hendrickson hatch, which usually starts once the water temperature hits that 50-degree range. I can't remember all the triggers. Something tells me it's 56 degrees, but anyway, once the river hits the or the low 50s, we start getting the Hendricksons, and then the good dry fly fishing really starts after that. So if you look at prime time, I would say from the first week of May to the third week of June, you can't go wrong. And then bass fishing opens the end of June. It's the fourth Saturday in June, and it goes till November, till the 30th of November. So I would say, again, the prime time is probably the first couple of weeks when it's weird now because I find everything is earlier than it was even 10 years ago. And when I say that, like the bass spawning, the first 2 weeks of the season was epic. I don't even like using that word anymore.
I know it's been used so much, but
it was. I mean, it was sensational. But now we're seeing, when I'm trout fishing on the Middle Grand in last week of April, first couple of weeks of May, I'm seeing vacated bass nests by the second week of May. So it's different. I think the ministry really should start to revisit some of these seasons because we're missing out on a lot of, a guy like me. I know this is going to sound a little self-serving, but I guide on the Middle Grand for rainbows. They have and again, it depends on who you talk to. There's a unique situation there where in the spring and again in the fall, there's a population. Some guys are going to call them, they're going to continue to call them resident rainbows. I don't think that they're a resident rainbow. I think that they are a reluctant steelhead smolt, a holdover. Once the fish leave their main spawning tributaries, which is the Nith River and Whiteman's Creek, when they get into the main stem of the Grand, the conditions are just good for them. So they'll hang out, I think, in some cases, a year or maybe even a fourth year, because we typically will get fish up to 18, 19 inches, but then you don't very often get them beyond that.
Oh, really? And how are they getting big? How are they getting to 19 inches? Are they eating in the creeks?
Yeah. They're great forage for them. So that's why I say once they hit the main stem, they're happy. They've got good water temperatures, so they don't need to smolt out right away. And the reason I say, I have a friend, his name is Wally Ward, Wally Ward, sorry. I haven't seen him in a while, but he was one of those guys that, he wasn't a biologist, but he was just one of those super fishy smart guys. And every time I had a conversation with him, he would make me think. And one day we were talking, I used to own a fly shop here in Ferguson, and Wally and I were talking about these fish on the Middle Grand, these rainbows. And he said to me, Rob, if those were a resident fish, why aren't you catching them 25 inches long? And I said, well, it kind of makes sense because you don't. So I think what's happening is those fish are hanging around longer than, say, they would on 90% of the other rivers, and they're smolting out late. They're smolting out after 3 years. And I've done some research on it, and it's not uncommon, even in your area. I read a paper on a river on the Olympic Peninsula that had these large holdover steelhead smolts on a regular basis. Like, guys will go in there and catch them on dry flies, and they'll be 15, 16, 17 inches long. But you won't get them bigger because eventually they're still determined to get back to the ocean.
Wow.
And I think that's what we're dealing with. So going back to the early season thing, I'm seeing those reds down there when the bass beds, when I'm trout fishing in early May. There's actively spawning bass by the second week of May. And they're all done. A couple of weeks after that, they're back on the feed and back out in the river. And when I say I'm missing an opportunity, we, like guys like Tyler and myself and some of the other guys, we should be able to promote that as a multi-species trip where you can go down there and catch a dozen or 15 real good smallmouth bass and do the same thing with these trout. I just think the ministry is really leaving something on the table.
That sounds amazing. So really that time, May, June is a great time because you've got the trout fishing going strong, and the brown trout and the rainbows, right? Or these trout you're talking about.
Yes.
And then you got the bass that's starting up pretty quick. Once the bass start, is pretty much after June, are you done trout fishing?
Again, it depends on the year. The tailwater, the Grand River tailwater doesn't have an infinite supply of cold water. So I have had years in the past, I've been fishing the Grand now for about 30 years. There has been years where we've been able to fish it all through August, but the past 10 years or so, we typically lose the cold water by the first week of August. And again, there are some mitigating factors there. If, for example, if we have a full reservoir early in the season and just enough rain to sort of keep it up, then it will discharge cold water longer. Now, let's say in mid to late July, we have a big rain anomaly, and it's happened. If they have to increase flows from the regulated 5 CMS up to 125 for 4 days, that just blows the cold water out. So we can lose it. So there, like I said, there are mitigating circumstances, but I would say I could, on a normal year, I can continue guiding well into the first, maybe even the second week of July safely. And then we're sort of onto the bass, if even, even if I'm in this province. And then from there, as a general rule, now with I'm finding year after year that the steelhead start coming in earlier and earlier. Typically by the end of September, we've got fishable numbers right across the southern part of the province, and I'm guiding for steelhead.
Yeah, and then you got steelhead going, and yeah, it's cool because when you look at Canada, I mean, you always think, well, it's this northern, but really this Ontario peninsula, essentially comes down, and where we're talking about comes down, and it's just the same latitude as Michigan, New York, right? You're right in the same area, so it's not like you're that far up north, and so and plus you're right in the middle of Lake Erie. Like I said, we fished the South Shore Lake Erie with Jeff Liskey. We fished with Rick Custich on some of those out of the Buffalo area. And you're talking about basically the other side of the lake. So it's a very similar game, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
It is. Nice. Well, this has been great. I think we're going to take it out of here in a little bit here. I've got a couple of random questions to ask you, but this is our top destination segment today. It's presented by Four Wheel Campers. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Four Wheel Campers, but they have this amazing pop-up camper. And we traveled actually out to Wisconsin this summer in it. And basically the top pops up 3 feet and it becomes this like king-size bed.
Yeah, I think I've seen them on.
Have you seen those?
Yeah, I think I have. Probably on YouTube or something.
This is just a testament. They've been around since 1972, forever. But the engineering is so good. I hate to admit this, but I got in a little bit of we were done camping one morning, and I kind of dropped the top, and I forgot the latch. The thing it basically has these outside latches that keeps it down. And as we were driving down the highway, I just realized, oh my God, I left the top up. And the funny thing is, I got out there, I was like, oh, okay, it's up. I popped it down, and we were probably going 65 miles an hour. I popped it down, and then I called Four Wheel Campers. I said, is this a problem? And it didn't do anything to it. It just shows you it's a testament to how strong these things are. So first, shout out to Four Wheel Campers. And for you, what is do you do any camping? Are you doing more traveling, staying in hotels, or do you have what's that look like for you when you're kind of doing your personal stuff or over the years?
Well, where I am, for the most part, when I was guiding full time, we had a number of B&Bs that we would stay in. If I knew I was going to be up there for 8 or 10 days in a row, I would just stay up there. But for the most part, where I am, I'm 90 minutes really from where I fish on a regular basis. So I'm mostly coming, for the most part, I'm coming home at night. Yeah. I'm not much of a camper anymore. I don't know if.
Yeah. Were you ever in your life much of a camper?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
What was that like? What did that look like? Were you more car camping or tent? What was your camping like?
When I was fishing, like if I was going fishing camping, like I grew up in Nova Scotia, and it wasn't uncommon. The canoe got put on the top of my old Honda Accord, generally in May, and it didn't come off until September.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So we roughed it. I remember I read an article that John Gierak wrote years and years and years ago in Fly Fisherman magazine, and it was called, I want to say it was called Stage. The article was titled Stage 5, and he talked about all the stages that fly fishermen go through from the camping under the stars with a sleeping bag, which I've done. I remember one time a friend of mine from Nova Scotia, we hitchhiked. This was before we had our driver's licenses, and we hitchhiked down to a river on the south shore of Nova Scotia called the Gold River. No tent, just sleeping bags, right under the stars, and there was this horrible smell all night. And we woke up the next day and walked down to the river, and there was about a 12-point buck dead in the river, but he was only half in the river. So that's what we were smelling. But anyway, so then stage 2 is tents, obviously, and then stage 3 you're thinking cabins,
right,
or hotels.
Hotels.
And then stage 4 is the more luxury hotel. It was something along those lines. And I'm definitely at stage 4 now.
You're stage 4.
I'm 56 years old.
What's the top? What's the top of the? Do you remember? We'll look that up and get a link out in that article.
Yeah. I wouldn't be able to find it anymore, but it was it was one of those ones that it was one of those articles that like so many Garrick articles that stuck with me.
Well,
over the years.
another amazing person, right, that passed away this year, and we've had him on the podcast multiple times, and I did a little tribute to him earlier this year as well. He was that guy, like I think all of us are similar, right, in the fly fishing thing. I feel like Colin, John, these guys I remember when John talked about it, I asked him on the first podcast, I was talking about how he got into it, and he talked about how his dad really loved fishing. It was like one of his favorite things, but he was so busy with work, he only got out like once a year. And he said, man, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to fish, as much. And that's part of the reason, like, he became a trout bum.
Yeah.
I mean, do you feel like that for you, where you're at, do you look back now and say, man, this is what I always wanted, or how did you become kind of a trout bum?
Well, I like to say I come by it honestly. My grandfather was a great sportsman, and fly fisherman. My father was a fly fisherman. He got me. Dad got my first rod. I think a neighbor gave it to us, and it was an old. I still remember it was an old Shakespeare Wonder rod, the old yellow ones. And Dad had an old Pridex reel that he gave me, and they were tearing up the Halifax shipyards back in the early 80s. And Dad kept bringing home these 8-foot lengths of 3-inch communication wire that he told me all summer I had to bare it all. So I had to take this 1/8-inch rubber insulator off the outside, and then there was all kinds of other insulation inside. So I ended up with all these 8-foot strands of 1-inch copper. And we took that to the salvage yard, and I think I got $80 for it, which was enough for me to buy. Dad said, you're not gonna go to Canadian Tire and buy a piece of fly line. You're gonna get an air cell line.
Right.
I said, okay. And they were like $40, $45, $50 at that time.
Wow.
And I got a
This is in the 80s?
Taper. This was in the early 80s,
Early
like 80, 81, 82.
Right.
I got a double taper air cell fly line, and a handful of flies.
This is Scientific Anglers, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And then I started fishing with them. We were 20 minutes away from, at the time, it was a good salmon river, and I caught my first Atlantic. I think the first fish I caught on a fly was a 12-pound Atlantic salmon.
Holy cow.
And I was screwed after that.
In Nova Scotia?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It ruined my life.
Yeah, that was it. Once you caught it, you catch your first Atlantic salmon, you just know, like, this is it.
Oh yeah. It was. I ate fly fishing after that. My grandmother, for probably that Christmas, right around then, she got me a subscription to Fly Fisherman magazine, and I looked forward to that one every other month, and then just fished my ass off when I was younger, and then I got into the tackle business. I worked for a company called Maurice Sporting Goods out of Chicago as a sales rep in the through the 90s. And that just opened up a lot of doors for me, and then I got involved with a guiding service here in Ontario. And in 2000, I said, "Screw it! I hate corporate life. I hate traveling. I hate selling fish hooks.
Right.
I'm going to try it." And that was 2000, and that was really I've had some part-time jobs in and out of the restaurant business through that time in the winter, just to sort of augment things, but. Yeah, I guess I'm a bona fide trout bum.
You are. Yeah, this is great. No, you are a trout bum. This is so good. I think that's the ultimate. I think that's like, go back to John. I think he lived his life how he wanted to live it. And one of his places too, right, was he talked a lot about fishing for those brook trout up at some of the lodges north of you.
Yeah.
Newfoundland and Labrador and all that stuff. So cool. Well, I got a couple random ones for you here, Rob, and then we'll get out of here. So
sure.
Always love to hear, I know our listeners, we all love music. So if you're on a road trip, are you listening to music or podcasts?
I'm both. I'm a big talk radio guy. And I'll be honest with you, Dave, I haven't really got on the podcast thing.
Oh,
yet.
Nice. That's good.
I love sports. I'm a huge sports fan. So I'm always listening to like ESPN.
Oh yeah. What's your sport?
Through Sirius.
What sports?
Baseball.
Oh, baseball.
I'm a huge baseball fan.
Yeah.
But I love all sports. I mean, I'll watch curling on Sunday afternoon if there's nothing on.
You will. So you love it all. So no matter what, like a pickleball, you'll watch any sport.
If that's all that's on, I'll put it on.
That's awesome. But the sports, I had a good friend, Randy. Shout out to Randy. Because I've been through it. Sports was always huge for me. I took a break when I started having kids, my first kid and stuff, because I just didn't have time. But I love sports too. And I remember him saying, like, the great thing about watching sports is that you never know what's going to happen, right?
That's right.
It's always a new thing. And then sometimes you see these athletes, which are at the top of the game, do things that are just, spectacular, right? The Jordans, whoever that is, do you remember that time? Always, when we go back to baseball, because baseball, basketball were my two sports, and I remember the steroid era, right? And it was crazy because watching that was like, I remember watching Barry Bonds and these guys, and they were just, it was like
McGuire,
right? McGuire,
and Sosa.
What was your take? Do you remember that? What's your take now on that and then looking back on it, on that whole thing?
I do remember it. I do remember it well. And they were juiced. I mean, there's always the argument. Barry Bonds, he probably would have hit as many home runs.
He would have done it,
but just not as far. But then my argument is, well, yeah, but what about all the home runs that just cleared the fence?
Yeah. Exactly. Well, and that's what I heard the story about Barry, and I can't remember who was talking. I think it was some sports person, but basically the way it worked was they were all jacking him out, right? McGuire and Barry was already the greatest player. I mean, he was like amazing, and he just looked at these guys like, well, God, everybody's doing this. Am I going to let these guys, right? And then he did it, and then he started jacking more.
Well, I guided a guy who was a former major league pitcher in the National League about 15 years ago, a guy by the name of Jeff Francis. He's a Canadian from BC, and he pitched for Colorado.
Wow.
I'm a Red Sox fan.
Oh, okay.
I'm a Boston everything fan. But,
you are. Gotcha.
Anyway, Boston beat Colorado in, I think it was 2008. I want to say 2008 World Series. But anyway, I talked to Jeff and I told him, I said, I'll teach you everything I can about fly fishing, but you got to let me pick your brain on baseball. So I asked him, who's the toughest guy you ever faced?
Right.
And he didn't even think about it. He said it was Barry Bonds.
It was.
So then he went on to tell me that there was an unwritten rule among pitchers in the National League that if you threw Barry Bonds a first pitch strike, you would go after him. But if you threw him a first pitch ball and got him into a hitter's count, you would pitch around him.
No kidding.
So with that sort of inside information, I had to rethink it. And Barry Bonds did that. He got those numbers probably being pitched around 50% of the time.
Jeez.
So he was that good.
He was that good. No, I know.
Yeah.
He was. Well, the cool thing about him was before the steroids things, he was fast. He was stealing bases.
Yep.
And he could hit anything. Yeah, I mean, I think he obviously was one of the great. It was kind of sad how it all went down because I think he was, I don't even know, but he was kind of used as the pitcher boy for all this stuff, right?
Yeah. He was the beaten stick.
Yeah, it was kind of rough, but okay. So we got some baseball here. That's good. And then what about? Do you have any music to take us away here? Or do you listen to music at all?
Oh yeah. I'm all over the place with music, but I'd have to say I'm a classic rock guy. I'm the world's biggest Eagles fan.
Oh, Eagles. Yeah.
But I love all of that. I love Leonard Skinner,
sure,
Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, across the board. But I also, funny enough, I find myself listening to classic country. And when I say classic country, I'm talking like 60s, 70s, and 80s, maybe the early 90s. But because I'm not a modern country music fan.
No, you're not talking necessarily like Garth Brooks, stuff like that. You're talking more like Johnny Cash.
Yeah, I mean, I do like Garth Brooks.
Yeah, me too.
He's got I got a lot of respect for him. But that would sort of be the end of it. That like I say, that early 90s. But I love folk. I'm a huge John Prine fan.
Oh, Prine, yeah.
That genre.
Gosh, yeah.
Arlo Guthrie, that kind of stuff.
Sure.
I'm wild. I'm across the board.
Yeah. Do you go to have you ever gone to any like shows or concerts or anything like that?
Yeah, I used to go to a lot of concerts when I was younger. Various festivals.
Sure. Yeah, music's great.
I'm a big Police fan too, and my wife bought me tickets for my I'm going to say it was my 40th birthday, which would have been 16 years ago. And I think that was the last tour that the police did.
Oh, it was. Yeah,
as
the police were great.
So that was cool. I got to see them.
Yeah.
But yeah, we love, my whole family loves music. And
Yeah. Yeah, music.
I don't go to concerts as much as I used to. And actually it's very infrequent now just because I just kind of got it out of my system. I think I don't even like going to the city to see a baseball game.
Right. Yeah, because you have, baseball-wise, right? You got Toronto's your closest pro team, right? They've won some World Series here recently. Or was it a while ago?
92 and 93.
Oh, so it's been a while.
They won back. Yeah, they did.
Okay.
They made the playoffs. They made the playoffs with the exception of this year. They have made the playoffs the last, I'm going to say 5 years.
Yeah.
But it hasn't been a great showing.
Yeah, not a great.
Like they've gone out in the first round.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, cool. And so this is good. So we'll get a little John Prine in the show notes. We'll see if we can find something with John out there. And then one last thing on the drift boats. We always love talking drift boats. It sounded like you have a what was your drift boat you're using out there?
It's an adipose flow.
Okay, yeah, you got the adipose. Cool.
Yeah,
they're out of Helena, I believe. Adipose.
Yes, they are,
or somewhere in that area, right?
Yep, Helena.
Yeah, Helena. Nice.
Yeah. I love the boat. I've owned Mackenzie style boats, clackas, and an old Osprey, which I don't even think are around anymore. But I got the flow that's 2018, and I don't think I'd ever go back to a Mackenzie boat.
Right, I know. Once you get unless you need it, right? Unless you get a bunch of whitewater, those low skiffs are the way to go.
Yeah, which I don't have.
Yeah, I feel the same way. We did Hyde. I was in my first skiff in a Hyde boat, and I rode it for the first time, and it was just, it was unbelievable because it's easy to get in. It's way easier to get in and out. It's light.
Yeah.
It's the perfect tool for that type of fishing. Even with three
big guys, I'm drawing at maximum 4 inches.
Right. That's it. God, it's so good. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a cool craft.
Nice. Cool, Rob. Well, this has been great today. We'll send everybody out. Maybe give us a heads up again if people want to connect with you or find out about guide trips. Where should we send them?
Sure, you can find me. Certainly find me on Facebook. That's probably the easiest. Either on my personal page. It's just Robert Heel, only because Rob was taken. Mm-hmm. I'm not that pretentious.
Yep.
And Rob Heel Fly Fishing Services, or my email is robertheel80 @gmail.com.
Perfect. All right, Rob. Well, thanks again. This has been awesome. Like I said, I'm excited. I'm going to be up in your neck of the woods. We're definitely going to be there. Hopefully, I'll get on the Grand someday soon. But I appreciate all your wisdom and knowledge today, and we'll look forward to keeping in touch with you.
Well, you know where I'm at. If you ever get up here, you got a day on the river if I'm in the province.
Awesome. All right, thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks, Dave.
The Grand River, we've definitely talked about it here. We highlighted it again today. If you're interested in finding out more about this, you want to get a trip, check in with Rob. Let him know you heard of this podcast. You heard of him from this podcast, and let him know if you're interested. You can do that on Facebook right now and check in. Please follow this show if you haven't yet. If you're brand new to this show, or if you haven't clicked that follow button, do it. And I'd love to hear if you're listening. Are you more on Apple Podcasts? Are you more on Spotify? Always interested in hearing about that. Let me know. And we're going to be getting out here. I just want to give one other shout out. Episode 700 is right around the corner. I'm not even sure at this point what it's going to be. So I'm thinking of the future. If you have an idea for episode 800, send me a message as well. And I want to give a shout out to the Steelhead School, which is launching very soon. It's going to be launching actually in about less than a week. We're doing this. We're heading actually across from Ontario to BC, British Columbia. But Jeff Liskay is going to be coming out from the South Shore Lake Erie. He's going to be at the Steelhead School this year. So if you want to get in on this trip and you're interested, send me an email, dave@wetflyswing.com, and I'll let you know the availability. We should have some spots because we are just kicking it off. And that's what I have for you today. Definitely hope you have a great morning. Hope you have a wonderful afternoon or a fantastic evening wherever you are in the world. And I appreciate you for listening all the way to the end. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.